Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Kovet Ahway. Iran's Natanz nuclear plant has been hit. A small explosion hit in what Iran has labeled as an Israeli act of terrorism. Nuclear terrorism, to be exact. And the timing could not be more suspicious in more ways than one. First, this happened on the week which was Iran's Nuclear Technology Week. Then it happened during the nuclear talks in Vienna between Iran and the world powers, minus the U.S. And third, it happened when the U.S. Defense Secretary was visiting Israel. Israel's act of sabotage and nuclear terrorism against Iran, the subject of this edition of the debate.
Israel has made no secret of its hostility toward Iran since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which led to the ouster of the US-backed Pahlavi monarchy. Israel, which is also a fierce opponent of Iran's peaceful nuclear program, has been behind the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists over the past years. On Sunday, Iran's Natanz nuclear facility in the central province of Isfahan was hit by a power outage. Israeli media confirmed that the Mossad spy agency carried out a cyber attack on the site. Iran also blamed the Israeli regime for the incident.
What happened in Natanz was a bold act of nuclear terrorism on Iranian soil. It can be considered under the category of crimes against humanity, which the Israeli regime has been doing that for many years now.
Saeed Khatibzadeh stressed that the incident will not slow down the country's nuclear program, rather it will speed up its advancement. He said the IR-1 centrifuges damaged in the blackout will be replaced with more advanced ones. Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif also accused Israel of sabotaging the Natanz facility and pledged revenge against Tel Aviv for the attack. Zarif suggested that the attack was an attempt to derail the talks held in the Austrian capital with the aim of reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal known as the JCPOA. The European Union also said the incident in Natanz could have been an act of sabotage and warned against any attempts to derail the JCPOA talks, which will resume on Wednesday in Vienna between Tehran and the remaining signatories to the deal.
And the bottom line for us is that we are saying that we are rejecting any attempts to undermine or to derail the ongoing diplomatic activities to try to resolve all the open questions regarding Iranian nuclear deal. We try to resolve them through diplomatic means currently in Vienna in the ongoing process of talks and negotiations of the parties of the JCPOA and through our contacts with the United States.
Russia also expressed hope that the attack on the Iranian nuclear facility will not undermine the Vienna negotiations. The Sunday attack came as U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was in Israel for talks with Benjamin Netanyahu, who vowed to do everything in his power to stop efforts for salvaging the JCPOA. U.S. media say Washington, which is Israel's closest ally, was not involved in the attack on the Natanz facility, but the timing of Austin's trip has raised doubts about the claim. Leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has stressed that Tehran cannot trust promises made by the new U.S. administration regarding the revival of the JCPOA. Now the attack on the Natanz nuclear facility can deepen the distrust as the incident further questions the sincerity of such promises.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, former UN weapons inspector in Iraq and former U.S. Marine intelligence officer Scott Ritter joins us from Bethlehem in New York. We also have political analyst Seyyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm, who joins us. Gentlemen, welcome. Scott Ritter, let me first start with you and get your reaction about what has happened. The Natanz uranium enrichment plant, where an act of terror has hit the plant's electricity distribution. What do you think about what has occurred?
First of all, we know it wasn't an act. This was a deliberate act, and the timing appears to have been deliberate, which means it was a well-planned attack, which means that the perpetrators of this attack, most likely Israeli intelligence, had goals and objectives that went beyond simply inflicting damage, and which would have a political aspect attached to them. And I think Iran has pretty much done what the Israelis wanted to do. Iran has condemned it, rightly so. Israel knew Iran would condemn it. But Iran, more importantly, from the Israeli perspective, has made a commitment to replace the damaged or destroyed IR-1 centrifuges, which are the only centrifuges currently allowed to operate in Iran under the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action, and replace them with more advanced designs. And this, I believe, is what the Israeli objective was all along, for Iran to commit to continued installation and operation of designs that are incompatible with its obligations under the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action. Yes, Iran says we are permitted to do so under Article 26 of the agreement, which says that if the United States lifts nuclear sanctions, Iran can do away with its obligations. But Iran has said that every action it takes under Article 26 will be immediately reversible. I believe that Iran's commitment to install more advanced centrifuges, not only in Natanz, but to transfer the centrifuge enrichment capability from Natanz to the Fordow underground nuclear facility, represents a more permanent action, which will be difficult to rectify in light of its ongoing negotiations with the United States. And this was the purpose of the Israeli attack, to undermine the negotiations currently taking place between Iran and the United States about the Americans rejoining the JCPOA, lifting sanctions, and bringing everything back into compliance with the original intent of the agreement.
Okay. Mostafa Khoshcheshm, Iran has accused Israel of carrying out this act of nuclear terrorism. Do you think Israel is guilty?
Israel is definitely guilty. Let's remember that in similar cases in the past, they always pursued the policy of ambiguity. But in the last three cases, starting from a similar attack on a centrifuge hall at Natanz months ago, they have reduced ambiguity to, take the responsibility one way or another through the U.S. media outlets like New York Times reports, where they quoted unnamed U.S. officials saying that the U.S. is clean of such actions, and they pointed the finger at Israel. There is no other regime in the world to enjoy an attack on a nuclear civilian facility except for Israel. And of course, let's remember that they have been emboldened enough to acclaim and to be proud of what they've done. When they assassinated the Iranian civilian nuclear scientist, Dr. Fakhrizadeh, they couldn't hide that they were happy with that, and they took some kind of pride in saying that they have the power to assassinate civilians. But let me point out that I disagree with your other guest. I do believe that this has been a joint venture by the United States and Israel. The Americans are the main beneficiary of this action and similar actions in the past. It's nothing new. We have already experienced it in the past decade before the JCPOA talks. This is part of the United States carrot and stick policy in order to push Tehran to the talks through increasing the costs and increasing the pressures. This is part of actually the maximum pressure policy that's still being pursued by the U.S. administration of Joe Biden.
I'm sorry to jump in, but hold on to your thoughts. Let me get a reaction then, if that's what you're disagreeing on with Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter, our guest there, says that this is something that both Israel and the U.S. cooperatively have executed, and the U.S. is a beneficiary in this case because it will want to pressure Iran to have flexibility in the talks to get Iran to accept whatever it is that the U.S. wants. Do you see it that way?
Possible. Look, the United States is the world's worst negotiating partner. If I were the Iranians, I wouldn't believe a thing the United States said. I'm giving my country the benefit of the doubt because right now no evidence exists that links the United States, complicit in this attack. But the fact of the matter is, Israel and the United States are joined at the hip policy-wise. We have shared interactions on the intelligence side of the house, the defense side of the house, the policy side of the house, and the likelihood of Israel carrying out an attack of this magnitude on Iran with this timing, without anybody in the Biden administration knowing about it in advance, is slim to none. So it's indeed possible, maybe even likely, that the United States and Israel were coordinating together on this. But the United States has to distance itself, because to come out and publicly acknowledge that there was an American role would destroy all confidence, not only on the part of Iran, which would have every right to be enraged by this act of nuclear terrorism, by somebody who wants to rejoin as a party to the Iran nuclear agreement, but also all the members of the JCPOA, Russia, China, France, Germany, Great Britain, the European Union, should all be outraged, not only by what Israel has done, but if the United States was complicit in this, with what the United States has done. It's totally incompatible with the spirit, letter, and intent of the negotiations that are ongoing in Vienna. So, I don't reject what he said. I acknowledge that it's a likelihood. There's no evidence of it right now, but logic dictates that the other gentleman is probably correct.
Well, Seyyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm, the U.S. Has come out and made a statement on this. It has said that it was not involved in any attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear site and this is the interesting part, and has no comment on speculation about the cause of the incident. The question is that the actual truth? Our guest says that the U.S. does not speak an ounce of truth when it comes to certain things. And how could this not have involved the U.S., especially when you have the U.S. Defense Secretary in Israel when this happened, not only having conversations with his counterpart, but also the latest to have been with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Let me raise the case like this. Ever since Trump took office, maybe a few months after he took office, he was accusing John Kerry that he was sending pulses to Iran to avoid business with Donald Trump and wait for a Democrat administration. No matter true or not, when Joe Biden started his campaign, he started talking about Iran deal, that he is very much up for reviving the nuclear deal, that he would definitely get back to the nuclear deal. He talked to the CNN and he published actually a manifesto with regard to Iran. He was very much expressive about Iran policy and the nuclear deal. But as soon as he took office, he started talking about Iran, pretending that China and Russia and domestic problems like COVID-19 were his priorities. So this reluctance, it was meant to push Iran to give up its leverages. They said that if Iran is willing to revive the deal, then Tehran could, give up its modified actions under the deal and resume its obligations. Why? Because they wanted Iran to give up its leverages. But Tehran, the Iranian top supreme leader, said that Iran is in no rush. Then the Iranian parliament approved the bill, a law that included 4 leverages against the U.S. 3 of them were of a nature of urgency and emergency as far as leverage on Biden was concerned. One was a halt of implementing the additional protocol to the NPT. But of course, Iran and the IAEA struck a deal to extend it for 3 months one way or another. This move actually lost its urgency. There remain 2 others. That was one, the enrichment to the 20% purity level. Second, Iran working on highly advanced centrifuge machines. It was then that Biden offered Tehran a deal, a partial deal. They called it preparatory steps to stop these 2 leverages in return for releasing part of Iran's frozen funds or all of the funds that have been frozen and removal of a number of sanctions. Iran rejected it outright immediately. Then we can see they came for this, attack on Natanz. And let's remember, the last year attack on Natanz was also on a hall that was where they assembled highly advanced centrifuge machines. And let's remember that Joe Biden, who was reluctant to talk even about Iran 2 weeks ago, in a sudden change of heart under these leverages, these 2 moves and actions, in a sudden change of heart, he called his administration into immediate sessions and meetings to wrap up a policy on Iran. And then they called for talks with Iran. They pressured Europeans to summon Tehran to talks in Vienna, and they've been pressuring Iran for talks. So they have been doing anything and everything to take away these 2 leverages, hoping that Iran would soften its tone after it loses these 2 leverages and would agree with the U.S. to a partial removal of sanctions and direct talks with the United States. One more point, and I wrap it up. One other purpose of this is that once you stop Iran's leverages and undermine Iran's power and hand in such confrontation with the U.S. over the JCPOA, then there will be marathon talks. That's one of the purposes of the United States. They want to lengthen the duration of the talks, hoping that they could wear off Iran's resolve through marathon talks.
Okay, well, Scott Ritter, first of all, this needs to be addressed by you. Do you think that what has happened is going to affect the talks that are happening in Vienna, and if so, how?
Good. I mean, it could. I happen to believe that the Biden administration is desperate to bring an end to the crisis around the JCPOA at this time. It recognizes several realities, one of which is that Iran is about to have a national election in which a new presidential administration will be brought in, one that's more than likely far more conservative than the present administration of Hassan Rouhani, and one that will be more in concert with the position of the Iranian parliament when it comes to Iran's nuclear program and international attempts to curtail it. So there's a window of opportunity to strike, and they want to strike. The other issue is there's a domestic imperative. The United States has created this artificial notion of a breakout window, the 1-year breakout time. The entire Joint Comprehensive Program of Action is built around that, constraining Iran's nuclear program so that if it decided to stop cooperating, it would take them 1 year to enrich enough uranium to produce a single fissile weapon, a nuclear weapon. And that would give the United States enough time to come up with a counter, whether military, diplomatic, or a combination thereof. Right now, Iran has blown past that 1 year mark. In fact, if Iran continues to install advanced centrifuges, this breakout window, which is an artificial construct, it doesn't exist except in the minds of American politicians. But that's the dangerous thing, that the American politicians in Congress and in the White House are convinced that Iran will be able to produce a bomb rapidly, and that the best hope is to get the JCPOA back in play. But remember this. The United States never intended to allow the JCPOA to reach its end-game state, meaning that at some point under the JCPOA, all restrictions would be lifted and Iran would be allowed unrestricted enrichment under Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty without constraints, as long as it's for peaceful purposes. That will never happen. The United States will never let that happen. Barack Obama said as much. He said, we're just buying 13, 14, 15-year time, and then we'll deal with this down the road. If Iran continues to insist on wanting to enrich, we'll have to come up with a way to stop it. And that's the policy of the Biden administration. So even if they're able to navigate these troubled diplomatic waters and come up with an arrangement with Iran that allows the JCPOA to come back into full force, Iran should not pretend or mislead itself into thinking the United States is just going to walk away and say, that's it, the JCPOA is done. Oh, American policy has been and will always be to deny Iran the ability to have unrestricted enrichment of uranium.
Okay, final question to you, Seyyed Mostafa. I'm sorry. Khoshcheshm, apologize for that. Where do you see the talks going? How has this affected it? If you can do that in about 2 minutes' time.
I believe that the move with the goals that I just said in mind, the Israelis and Americans, this has been a joint venture to soften Iran's tone, to weaken Iran's stance, but I believe it would backfire. Tehran would definitely do a number of reciprocal actions. First and foremost, I believe Tehran's stance would remain tough, and they would even toughen their tone. There are calls in Tehran already to call for a halt or stop or ending any kind of talks in Vienna until the world powers, the IAEA and others, take action against Israel and do their duty, or do something for world peace and security. Otherwise, Iran would have would be entitled to the right to retaliate, and this would escalate tensions. Therefore, the world powers and the IAEA are duty bound to take action against this act of terrorism, nuclear terrorism. And in addition to toughening tone, I believe, by Tehran, if they continue the talks in Vienna, they would toughen tone. And after that, maybe after a few months, we would see Iran's reciprocal action one way or another through cyber attack or through the military or whatever. Because if they don't stop the Israeli atrocities, let's remember that this could have happened a day earlier when Iranian officials were visiting the facility, and this could have killed them, you know. This could have killed the Iranian experts and politicians as well as nuclear scientists in there. This could have wreaked havoc on the environment by radioactive pollution. Therefore, Tehran would definitely make Israel and the United States pay for that. Otherwise, they would be emboldened to scale up and to enhance their threats and widen their threats to Iran.
Okay, I do have more time here. So, Scott Ritter, I'm going to ask you something that you mentioned about the centrifuges. Now, we have had the Atomic Energy Organization head, Dr. Ali Akbar Saleh, is saying that the damaged centrifuges, and I'm quoting him, will be replaced with even more powerful ones. You talked about how that puts Iran on a path of it being irreversible, if I heard you correctly. If you can expand on that a little bit more, because Iran has always said that it can reverse the actions that it is taking when it comes to its nuclear program in terms of the way forward that it is going with it.
Well, there's a couple things. Not only did they say that they're going to replace the damaged IR-1 centrifuges with more advanced designs, but they also spoke of transferring enrichment capability out of Natanz into the Fordow underground facility, which is a much more difficult target for Israel, the United States, or anybody else who wants to physically interdict Iran's enrichment capability. This is impermissible under the JCPOA. And, you know, if for Iran to live up to its obligation to reverse everything that it has done, citing Article 26 of the JCPOA, Iran would have to be willing to transfer everything out of Fordow back to Natanz, decommission all of these new centrifuges. I'm not saying that's impossible, but I'm saying that it makes things much more difficult, you know, for Iran to reach compliance with its obligation to reverse the measures undertaken under Article 26. And I think that's what Israel intended. I think Israel intended to compel Iran to escalate its enrichment activities in a manner that are incompatible with the JCPOA, thereby complicating the negotiations in Vienna. Whether Israel did this in concert with the United States or independent of the United States, only history will be able to tell. But this is a deliberate effort on the part of Israel, most likely some elements within the Biden administration, to sabotage the negotiations that are taking place in Vienna right now.
Okay, very well. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Former UN weapons inspector in Iraq and former U.S. Marine intelligence officer Scott Ritter there. And thank you, political analyst Seyyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm. That brings us to an end for this edition of The Debate. From Mikhail Goodbye until next time.